John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. And, of course, you can check out his national column on our website entitled Extra Points at 97.3 ESPN.com. And follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen. All right, John, let's get into some Eagles and NFL news and notes for today. Eagles, the coordinators both speaking today. Of course, the offensive coordinator, Frank Reich, with some interesting takes today. As really, I was surprised. Yesterday we were talking about the 04 Eagles and this year's team. And I was surprised to know that this year's team is averaging 32 points a game, and that team averaged 24 points a game. That's over a touchdown disparity in those two offenses. Is how good is this Eagles offense?
It's been really good, and it's been really explosive. And the amazing part about it is you don't have a superstar outside of the quarterback, obviously, who is the engine of this entire thing and likely would be the MVP if the season ended today. So you have him, but generally, when you put up the numbers the Eagles have put up, you have some gaudy skill position people. And other than Zach Ertz, who was having a very good season until he tweaked his hamstring, came back and had probably his worst game of the year in Dallas. But I assume he'll get back on track. Nobody's really stood out and had the huge numbers. Alshon Jeffery starting to come on. We've talked about the running back by committee all year. It seems to be a different guy every week. But you look at the touchdown numbers, and you look at Jeffrey there and Aguilar and Corey Clement. It's really amazing what this offense has been able to do, and I think it's a testament to both Doug Peterson and Frank Reich. I think they've game planned tremendously well. They have a big playbook, and they use it, and they have a ton of formations, a ton of inventive plays, and they've done a very good job integrating different pieces into what's a pretty complicated offense.
Yeah, John, we went through the skill positions yesterday. McNabb versus Wentz, you've got there. You've got Westbrook and Dorsey Levens as the running backs versus the four-headed monster, I guess, if you will. Really three. I mean, Barner had one carry. It happened to be for a touchdown, right? And he had the one catch.
Well, he had two touches.
Right.
And the one was the great catch that set up the touchdown.
Yeah.
So it's amazing they even get Kenyon Barner involved with two touches.
Then you have T.O. and Pinkston against Alshon Jeffery, Torrey Smith, and Aguilar. I don't know who was the third guy on that 04 team. Pinkston and who was it? Freddie Mitchell? Was he on the Super Bowl team there? And then you have Chad Lewis, the tight end, with L.J. Smith and Zach Ertz and Selleck and Burton there. So you almost go through those names. I think like Westbrook and T.O. were better, but the units as a whole were better. And Wentz and McNabb, you can make them really say that Wentz is playing at a higher level, although McNabb was like, the runner-up for the MVP that year.
Yeah, and Donovan's a borderline Hall of Fame quarterback. But I mean, if you're going to pin me down and say who would I rather have,
Come on, we just played the Ric Flair music. You're in a figure four right now. You tapping out or not?
Yeah, that's. I mean, I'd rather have Carson Wentz. That's how good Carson is playing, and his upside is off the charts. So I think it starts there. But when you talk about the superstars, and T.O. was a superstar, and Brian Westbrook wasn't far behind as far as being a well-rounded running back. They don't have players like that on this offense. Their best players are probably Zach Ertz, who I think is a tremendous pass-catching tight end, and Alshon Jeffery, who's been okay but not great, certainly nowhere near T.O. level as a receiver. You don't have those kinds of guys on this team, and it's kind of amazing to me how they've been able to generate offense without really, really spectacular talent at the skill position positions. And I keep going back to it. The two guys I'd point to are the two guys in Green Bay over the last quarter century, and that's Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers, because I think they, more than anybody else, define elevating players around them. Because I think if you look at a lot of those good Green Bay teams, you mentioned one of them who ended up on the Eagles, Dorsey Levens. There's so many names you can bring up. Antonio Freeman, another one who ended up here eventually. Greg Jennings, players like this they were good players, but they were great when they were playing with those quarterbacks. That's what Carson Wentz is doing. If you put these players around an average quarterback, it's not the same.
John, since you guys went with offense, how do you match up the defense, this year's defense, with that 0-4 defense? Of course, you have B-Dog. Does this team have a guy on that level?
Yeah, I mean, this defense is loaded. This defense is I've been talking about it since the off season and training camp, really. They have difference makers at all three levels. You lost one in Jordan Hicks, unfortunately, but they've been able to mask it, and are only getting better and better because of the defensive backfield. Darby coming back, who played better, I think, than anyone expected, and played more than anyone expected, played the entire game. I thought they'd try to sort of mix him back in. But it starts with the front, and it starts with the coordinator. Obviously, they had a great coordinator in 2004 as well. They do now. He's one of the best in football. And those guys up front, I mean, Fletcher and Brandon Graham are the two stars. But, man, they're just so deep. And Tim Jernigan's really good. Derek Barnett's coming on like gangbusters. I think he's going to be a pass-rushing star in this league. But even the role players, the Bo Allens of the world, and the Destiny Valleos, who nobody talks about, and he's back, and what he means. They rotate 8 guys, and that means, when it's the fourth quarter and other teams are kind of wilting up front because they can't go 8 deep, all of a sudden the Eagles are fresh and ready to go. So I think it starts there. And then you have certain guys, and that's what happens generally when you have Super Bowl-like seasons. You start having career years from certain players, and I think you're getting that from Nigel Bradham. I think you're getting, obviously, a bounce-back year from Michael Kendricks. Jalen Mills has turned it on. And we've talked about the versatility of Malcolm Jenkins a lot. The guy plays – I wrote about it a couple weeks ago. He's played 5 different positions this year in the back 7, and there's only 7. He's been amazing. So that the defense is loaded. It's not one guy carrying the defense. In a lot of ways, I think it's one guy that sort of, is. I'm not going to say carry it. That's probably going too far, but certainly everything revolves around him. He's sort of like the center of the universe, and if he's not there, everything falls apart with Carson Wentz. I don't think it's the same way defensively.
Well, that's 2 faces of the game, of course, offense, defense. What's the third one, John, right? The kicking game, right? Special teams. How do you match that up, this year's version of special teams versus the Super Bowl team in 2004?
Well, it's always good with Dave Phipp. I mean, ever since he's gotten here. And it was interesting in Dallas, they probably had one of their worst games they've had, starting with the opening kickoff, which put Dallas in scoring position. It wasn't a typical game, and obviously Jake Elliott got concussed on that play, ended up missing the 34-yarder. And the Eagles had to go with Camu Grugier-Hill as their kickoff specialist, and then obviously couldn't kick extra points or field goals. They didn't need to because they scored touchdowns and they got 2-point conversions. Obviously, you don't want that going forward. Jake has struggled a little bit recently, but I think they love him long term. Hopefully he gets through the concussion protocol, can kick this weekend, but his leg, and really you could argue that kick that 62-yard kick to beat the Giants is really when this team took off.
It really was. We've talked about that a couple times on this show, John, that how the season may have changed had they missed that kick, weren't in position to even try that kick. I mean, the Wentz throw to Alshon Jeffery on that, out pattern there that puts him in position. Elliott hits that kick, and then they really took off. The Giants season went off the rails following that. So it really changed the fortunes, really, for the Eagles. Who knows what it did for the Giants, but their kicking could be in question this week, really.
Yeah, it can. Tomorrow's the key day, obviously, and we'll see if Jake's back. I saw him in the locker room today. He can't talk because players aren't allowed to talk who are in the concussion protocol. He certainly looked fine, so we'll see. That doesn't necessarily mean all that much, but we'll see how things move forward. And real quick, I want to backtrack for a second. When I mentioned career years, you also got to talk about Patrick Robinson because he's been just ridiculous as the slot cornerback on this team. He's been one of the best cornerbacks in football, and I don't know anybody who saw that coming.
John, you could say that. You could say that for a lot of these guys that they're maybe not as good a year as Robinson, but if you universally go through the 22 starters, but just about there's not a guy on this roster that you're saying is having a down year.
No, there isn't. There really isn't. And even guys, so many surprises. I just mentioned a couple of them on offense. We've talked in the past about Nelson Aguilar improving, although he didn't have a very good game in Dallas. Also, Vaitai, Big V, stepping in for Jason Peters. I think we were all waiting for the shoe to drop there. And left tackle seems to be more natural for him than right tackle. And you haven't even noticed him, which is kind of amazing and speaks to how solid he's been. And he really was the one with the key block that opened up things for Jay Ajayi's big run, which went 71 yards. So he's another one you wouldn't have expected from. And that's what you kind of need when you have these types of seasons. And the Eagles are 9-1. They're going to be 10-1. I can't even imagine the Chicago Bears beating this team. And then you go on the big road trip, which I think will kind of define whether this is a ridiculous, 14-win team versus just a 12-type win team.
Hey, John, I saw Alshon Jeffery at the Sixers game last night sitting next to LeGarrette Blount, and Alshon Jeffery had a big smile on his face, and why not? It looks like he's heating up, at least statistically. What are you seeing behind the scenes with Alshon Jeffery?
Well, hey, I think it was funny because Alshon talked today, and Alshon's not a big talker, but he kind of realizes this is a big week because obviously his old team is coming in. And he made a statement after the Bears' last game last season when he said, we're going to win the Super Bowl next season. And everyone kind of said, what the hell are you talking about? Because that team's awful. And it was brought up to him today, and he said we. I didn't say which team. And obviously he was a free agent. He signed with the Eagles, and now he's looking sort of like Nostradamus because this team's in a position to make a Super Bowl run. I don't think that's where he was going with it. It's just kind of worked out that way, worked out for him well. But he's been a good locker room guy. He's used to getting the football more. It's picked up certainly over the past 3 or 4 weeks. But, Doug Peterson mentioned it when he was talking about the running backs. It also applies to the receivers because Carson spreads the ball around, and it generally tends to be a different guy each and every week. And if you weren't winning, I think you would hear some grumbling, whether it's running backs not getting the football, whether it's receivers not getting enough targets. But Doug kind of said, when you're 9-1, that kind of stuff takes care of itself, and people just want to be involved.
We're talking with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, covers the Eagles and the NFL. Follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen. And obviously this week with a, Thanksgiving in there, and Thursday the team's going to be off. They're getting ready for this Chicago team, which, as you said, it almost seems that this Bears team at 3-7. You said I don't know how many ways that you can find to beat them, but the defense this week has to be licking their chops the way this Trubisky kid has been playing. Although they do run the ball pretty well.
Yeah, and I brought that up with Jim Schwartz today because that's obviously that's what Chicago has, a very good running game, and Trubisky's just not ready to play. And he's not ready to play against bad defenses, never mind this defense. So there was a game against, I think, Carolina where he threw it 4 or 5 times. I can't imagine him letting him throw it a lot against this Eagles defense. And if they do, it's going to be a disaster. And it's interesting because he was the number 2 overall pick in the draft, and there's a vast difference between his number 2 overall and Carson Wentz's number 2 overall. This guy's a real big project, and the fact that Chicago generally rolls him out a lot. He's athletic, he's mobile, he's got a good arm. So from a skill set standpoint, he's got big-time skills, but they generally cut the field in half and give him high-low reads, which is as simple as it gets in this league. And that's just not going to work against this Eagles defense. So they're going to run the ball. They like a lot of trick plays. And it's really just there's not much they can do. I don't know. I mean, I always say it's very rare you get gimmies in the NFL. This is as close to a gimme as it gets.
Yeah.
It really is.
More so than playing San Francisco that week where, we were really stretching to find ways that you can lose that game?
Close. It's very similar, but because San Francisco went with C.J. Beathard, and it was a similar type situation. But if anything, and Beathard's probably more equipped to run an NFL offense than Trubisky. Now, the upside isn't the same. Because Trubisky's got a much better skill set. But he's just so raw that he can't run a lot of what a typical NFL quarterback can do. And I'm speaking about Trubisky. So they're so limited in what they can run from a passing game standpoint. But they do run the football well, and they have a very good interior offensive line. They have the 2 running backs, and they're different running backs. You got the big bruising type, and then you got a Darren Sproles type, undersized, very young, very fast, who can beat you in the passing game. So they could create some hiccups in the running game. They really could. But
that's Jordan Howard, by the way, and the kid Cohen will be interesting.
Tariq Cohen as well.
He'll be interesting out of the backfield catching the ball with the short passing game. Let me ask you this question regarding Jim Schwartz. And, I talked about it yesterday with the Cowboys game is, it doesn't seem that they change their scheme or their looks all that much. They just do what they do. They don't allow the other team to really dictate to Jim Schwartz what he's going to call. Would he agree with that he basically does what he wants to do, that his philosophy isn't really going to change rookie quarterback this week? Well, we're not going to blitz you more. We're not going to stack the box because you have some running back, Jordan Howard. We're going to line our guys up the way we do it.
Well, I think Jim might take an exception to that. I mean, generally he's thought of as one of those guys who wants to simplify things so his players can play fast. And I think that was true more so last year. Now in the second year, I think he's got a bunch of veteran guys who understand what he wants accomplished, so he does a little bit more. And I think he kind of saw that once Jordan Hicks got injured. I think we were all saying, well, it's going to be Bradham and Kendricks as the nickel linebackers, and most of the time it is. But he rolled out that dime defense with Malcolm Jenkins playing linebacker, really, and he had 6 defensive backs on the field. So he does do a lot of different things, and one of the things in the pass rush he's done is move Brandon Graham inside. So generally, when they have their best pass rushers on the field, it's Graham next to Fletcher Cox inside, Chris Long at left end, Derek Barnett at right end. We mentioned Darby. He put Darby back in at right corner, not left corner, where he was playing before he got injured. And we'll see if he switches back. So he does do a lot of different things. And one of the more underreported signings, again, I talk about underrated signings, and I start with Patrick Robinson. But when they brought in Corey Graham, they got a lot more comfortable moving Malcolm around because they felt they had a safety they could rotate in and handle that position. So he's been a big impact on this defense and doing different things as well. So I think it's a lot more complicated than it was last season.
Yeah, and by the way, Rasul Douglas didn't get a snap last week. That kind of shows you how deep the team is. He played a huge role. He wasn't an MVP or a Defensive Player of the Year guy, but he's had some picks. He's had some nice, games, and he didn't get on the field last game. And keep in mind, by the way, Sidney Jones, you drafted in the second round. Many people thought if he was healthy and he was there at 14, they would have taken him at 14. He hasn't played a snap yet this year.
Yeah, they're really deep, and I mentioned that. I said earlier, before the trade, once they traded for Darby, all of a sudden what looked like the worst position on the team, I mentioned, could be the best and very quickly in 2 or 3 years, and it's going even quicker than that because once Sidney Jones gets healthy, as you mentioned, that's a first-round talent. Rasul has played well as a rookie. He's only going to get better. The one issue is I don't know, Patrick Robinson is making himself some money. We mentioned him a number of times. He really is. So I don't know if you're going to have to pay him a lot to bring him back, and you're talking about a nickel back. So that's a very, very difficult position to fill. And the Eagles sort of got lucky with that signing. But do you really want to commit to him long term? I'm not sure if we can follow up this season. This might be catching lightning.
Right.
And then if you look forward to next season.
And they're going to have a lot of guys like that, John. You've got Blunt, you've got Jeffrey, you've got Rob. They're going to have a lot of guys on the one-year deal.
Prove-it deals, they proved it.
Yeah, and
Bradham's on Bradham's at the end of his deal too.
Yeah, I don't think it's as big as a deal with Blunt because you got Ajayi.
Right.
And I do think you got to make a tough decision with Alshon because I just don't think they're good enough at wide receiver, even though they're much improved. And similar, because all the guys, Darby, Jones, Mills, Douglas, I don't know if any of them would be nearly as good in the slot as Patrick Robinson. Jalen would probably be the one guy that could perhaps project. But again, you don't worry about that stuff. You're 9-1.
Right.
You got to go win the Super Bowl before you worry about next season.
Hey, John, before we let you go, tell the truth. Of all the press conferences you go to during the week, is Jim Schwartz your favorite? He doesn't praise anybody. He's very loath to heap out praise, and he's real dry with his humor, but definitely entertaining.
Yeah, and Jim likes the analogies, and he likes to bring up things. Today we got a Hank Stram reference, and he's kind of proud of himself when he throws out those references. But yeah, he carries himself like a head coach. He was a head coach. You can tell he gets, he's a no-nonsense guy. I don't think he was happy today. It was very short early in the press conference. But then when you get him talking, he starts to enjoy it. And he is, yeah. He's a very underrated, entertaining guy.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen, and check him out on 97.3 ESPN.com. Take care, John.
Hey, thank you, guys.